everyone. It's Monday, August 9th. We're in the summer hot days, but gladly, our Congress is still working on some of the important things that we need to get done in this country. And I'm happy to have with us someone who can give us a great roadmap to where we're going. We have with us our Congressman for the 2nd District in Connecticut, Congressman Joe Courtney. Hi, Joe. It's good to see you as always.
Good to see you, Sheila.
Okay. So, Joe, you're back to Connecticut to do constituent work and meetings. But when you left Congress, the House of Representatives had passed a lot of important legislation, and now we're waiting on the Senate to do its work, and they're still in session. Tell us what's most important now. We have the COVID Delta coming back. We have to make sure our kids can start school. We have all the economic issues that were involved with our COVID and our rescue plan. What's still happening for us in Connecticut?
Sure. Well, thank you for the invitation. As you point out, the House, is back home in district, again, doing our work period, but we are on standby, 72 hours notice, in case, again, we get an overall sort of pathway forward for both the infrastructure bill, which looks like it's going to finally get through the Senate process, but also, we have to do a budget resolution for the fiscal year 22 budget, which is, fast approaching October 1, as you know, Sheila, is the start of the federal fiscal year. So right now we're still very much engaged with local towns and communities, different stakeholders in the district regarding last March's American Rescue Plan, which the president signed into law on March 11th. And you mentioned reopening schools, which is fast approaching, as our great new Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, said yesterday on the talk shows. Everybody agrees that getting in-person reopening is a priority that everyone agrees is best for families, for kids, for our, the stability of our education system, which, again, suffered great learning loss during the COVID months in 2020. One of the ways that I think we can get to that end game is because of the American Rescue Plan education funding, which is pretty eye-watering when you look at the 2nd Congressional District. It's about $135 million that's coming to the district for school aid. Again, it's primarily done on the basis of Title I, which is a needy school district formula, again, based on the demographics. In a place like Norwich, I'm sitting in the Norwich district office right now. It's close to $20 million in terms of what the school district can use to safely reopen, to, again, reconfigure, the space inside the schools, and also get some help in terms of staffing to make sure that, again, population density in the schools is reduced. There also in the rescue plan was town aid that communities qualified for. Same thing for communities like Norwich and New London, who got $20 million over a 2-year period for, again, COVID-related expenses. But again, the Treasury Department is being very flexible in terms of how you define what is eligible for communities. So, for example, in Norwich, they're using the rescue plan money to deal with some capital projects that kind of were put on hold because of COVID. They are filling 3 positions in the Norwich Police Department, which were not going to be filled but for the rescue plan funding. Interesting development in terms of, who in fact is really, against defunding the police. I think the folks like myself who voted for the rescue plan are helping local communities make sure that they don't go backwards in terms of public safety. Again, the town of Waterford just released their rescue plan money, where they're going to be using it for helping nonprofits like the Eugene O'Neill Theater, which has some, again, sort of mini infrastructure needs that make that amazing institution ready for full reopening in the future. Another big piece of the rescue plan that we're trying to get the word out is that it included an infusion of money into the Affordable Care Act health plans. The folks who run the program in Hartford gave me an example of a family in the Middletown area, family of 3 that was paying $1,000 a month for their premiums under the Affordable Care Act plan that they signed up for last year. Because of the rescue plan infusion of money, their monthly premium is close to 0. And that has been the big bone of contention. I think you know this, Sheila, is that the ACA, which did so much in terms of expanding coverage to 20 million Americans, but for people whose income exceeded the subsidy level, the premiums were extremely expensive, and the rescue plan is a huge game changer. $85 million in new premium assistance in Connecticut for people who are already enrolled in the program. And now we're seeing new people sign up for it because they realize that it's a much more affordable package that's there. And as you point out, I mean, with the Delta virus, we've got to make sure people are in as strong a position in terms of their own health coverage and access to health, because we've obviously still got work ahead of us, even in a great state like Connecticut, which has done so well in terms of vaccinations.
Right. How are we doing compared to other states? I think we're doing pretty well in terms of hospitalizations and deaths and the occurrence of the Delta. What do you hear about that?
Yeah, no, it's there's no question that the infection rate, which is creeping up, and no one likes that, but because of the high vaccination level, which I think we're 4th in terms of, I think there's maybe a territory that's ahead of us, but 4th in terms of states. The adult population is extremely strong in terms of vaccinations, and we're doing pretty good on 12 to 18-year-olds that are there. But the metric that matters the most, and you mentioned this, Sheila, is hospitalizations. For people who are getting infected in Connecticut, who by and large are vaccinated, that means that the symptoms and the impact is far less harmful than in other parts of the country where the vaccination rates, sadly, have really trailed the rest of the country. And that's where they're seeing the filling up of ICU units, these terrible, heartbreaking stories of people who are regretting the fact that they didn't get the vaccinations. So again, it's we still got to just keep our foot on the gas in terms of making sure these vaccinations, even the remaining ones that we haven't accomplished in Connecticut, take place. We're got our fingers crossed that the FDA is going to issue a full authorization, as Fauci said on the last day or two, because I think, frankly, that's going to give a lot more employers, particularly in the public sector, stronger footing to really kind of tell people, hey, it's now fully authorized. It's time to, help the rest of the community in terms of getting vaccinated and getting this country, much further along in terms of getting on the other side of the pandemic.
All right. So it's important. I'm glad you talked about the American Rescue Plan. It's important for our citizens in Connecticut to know exactly what's in it and how it's helping communities. And it's going so far as to help, I know, Goodspeed Opera House, Eugene O'Neill Theater, other things to bring us art, to bring us more normal into the kinds of things that we enjoy doing. And hopefully we can. And how we're hoping with the help that the plan is giving, that the schools will not have to have virtual remote learning, that all our kids can go in person, but probably be wearing masks and so forth. So it's important. Thank you for keeping on reminding us about all of these programs. A couple of other points in it, though. The rental assistance that we need to talk about, and the idea that there was a moratorium on evictions that ended, but President Biden is trying to reinstate that, but there is some legal issues. So talk about those two programs.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I mean, it's so important because you're right. In the rescue plan, I think there was a recognition that the moratorium, which was done for sound public health reasons, still sort of begged the question about who pays, because a lot of landlords, and I'm sure you represented some of the smaller folks over the years, that they've got to pay a mortgage, they've got to pay property taxes, and if they don't have rental income coming in, they're hard pressed. So the rental assistance component of the American Rescue Plan basically allowed states to set up a program where, for example, in Connecticut, landlords and tenants can apply for assistance for unpaid back rent up to $15,000 per unit, which is obviously a pretty healthy sum of money. To be honest with you, the program has struggled in terms of, getting out there publicly. And, we held some public events. We've tried to use social media. But again, it really, I think, has now become much more urgent because the moratorium, as you said, may be of a very limited duration, and that we maximize every penny. Connecticut got about $400 million of funding to pay rental assistance. And so far, I think they barely paid 10% of that, or 15% of that. Yeah. So there's more out there. If people have questions, they can certainly call my office in Norwich. There's Unite CT is the agency that's running that program. And frankly, it's beneficial for landlords. This money is not going into, uncooperative or, tenants who are undeserving, so to speak. I mean, this is about helping, people who've got to pay the bills for keeping units safe and open.
Right. On another issue that we're trying to keep our young people safe and all of us safe from acquiring the Delta variant, what do you make of all of the antagonisms by mostly the governors and states on mask mandates and having executive orders against them and seeming to do everything possible not to make sure that each individual is a part of the entire community and helping us with getting rid of this health virus? What do you make of it? Why are they doing this? There's such a huge contradiction because, last year, some of these governors were the loudest voices complaining about school districts that were operating either virtually or on a hybrid basis and demanding that kids had to be there in person. And, nobody, in my opinion, disputed the fact that having in-person schooling is better. It's infinitely better. And as the Secretary Cardona, who's an amazing guy, by the way, I mean, I've gotten to know him since his confirmation because I still sit on the education committee. But again, he really powerfully said, let's make this about A, making sure kids go back in person, and B, do it in a way that's smart and safe, and stop, the politicization of, masks. Because if you're living in an area with high infection rates, and frankly, some of those are some of the very same states where the loudest complainers are, that's where the medical opinion and expertise says is the biggest risk for both, not just older people, but young people to be exposed to a much more transmissible variant of the virus. And again, to me, it's just stunning how completely contradictory the position that these folks are taking, because, as I said, just opening up schools and ignoring the fact that in the community there's high transmission and infection rates, you're just basically asking for huge trouble that would expose children's families and staff who are adult age in the school district. I mean, it makes no sense. Yeah. Well, so American history, and of course there are always anti-vaxxers, always a very small percentage of people who are against certain kinds of vaccinations and perhaps have some medical issues that would prevent them from getting a vaccine. But never in our history before, comment on this, have we had a situation where we've politicized the idea of people wearing masks, of people getting vaccinations. And I think it's a relic of, it's Trump, and it's these governors who feel they have to out Trump, and they've kind of know it's wrong, but they're doubling down because they want to get the accolades of Trump's base of people for their political fortunes. How do you see that? Is there ever a time we've done that?
It's such a contradiction again, because at the same time that former President Trump is complaining that he's not getting enough credit for Operation Warp Speed, which I think everybody, President Biden, Democrats acknowledged that Operation Warp Speed was an extraordinary success. By the way, Congress through the CARES Act, which Democrats supported, and all the COVID relief bills, were in fact demanding more robust investment in Operation Warp Speed than what the administration initially requested. But whatever. I mean, the point is, that was a real incredible achievement for the researchers and the teamwork of government and the pharmaceutical industry. And so why there would be any inclination to denigrate the effectiveness of a vaccine, which really has now had hundreds of millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of shots and jabs around the world, and shows an incredibly small fraction of really serious adverse effects. Trump should be the first guy out there telling people to get vaccinated, because hey, I'm the guy who did it through Operation Warp Speed. But
it's very sad.
It's trying to explain the thought process there. I give up.
Right. Yeah. Well, there's certainly one part of it is that Trump and some of the Republicans, sadly, are putting the political interest ahead of the interests of the people. They want to see Biden not succeed in that. It's just terrible. And it's just something we really have never experienced, I think, before really in our history. And along those lines, let's talk about more success of the Biden administration in the work that the Senate is now doing, and you've already done in Congress. Infrastructure, roads, bridges. It's been so many years since we've had a federal program to take care of these issues. Talk about the prospects of getting those legislations passed.
Great. Well, I'm bullish on it, is my basic view. And as you and I talked off camera, there's just no question that having the Senate actually even overcome what has become a supermajority structural requirement for bills to pass, which is a whole another topic we could spend time on. But obviously you don't want to squander that. And I give President Biden tremendous credit for being so persistent in terms of trying to make that happen, make that come together. Again, this is a good bill. There's no question, as you point out, it's not the sort of stand pat reauthorization of highway bills that we've had in succession over the last 10 years, which have really done nothing to modernize this country in terms of, not just roads and bridges, but rail and airports and seaports, something that, really has, I think, hindered our country. So it looks like we're, today when we're talking, we're down to hopefully the final 24, 48 hours of deliberations out of the Senate. Speaker Pelosi, as I said, has us on standby. I think she, in my opinion, correctly, is insisting that the Senate move forward with the fiscal year 22 budget resolution, which is an ambitious package, which the president laid out as the American Jobs Plan back in the State of the Union address. And again, that's going to, I think, encompass a larger scope of other priorities, some of which we included in the House infrastructure bill. Thank you for mentioning the fact that we did actually pass one, the Invest Act, about a month or so ago. And I think particularly in the area of climate change, trying to boost transit, we'll see, I think, some more robust assistance through the budget resolution process. And then I think we can take up the infrastructure bill for final action, and then get to work in terms of getting the fiscal year 22 budget. Real quick on the fiscal year 22 budget, having been on the education committee for my whole time pretty much in Congress, this budget that Biden sent over in terms of education is a 16% increase in last year's spending levels for the whole range of federal education, whether it's Title I, impact aid, which helps school districts with military installations like Southeastern Connecticut, magnet school funding, special education, which is one of the biggest complaints about the federal mandate for IDEA. This is a really good budget for people who care about education. Rosa DeLauro, who chairs the Appropriations Committee, got the spending bill through for the Federal Department of Education intact, along the lines of what I just discussed. And it's going to make sure that the assistance that the rescue plan gave to school districts, that they're not going to just fall off a cliff when that money is exhausted in sometime in 2024, that we're going to have now a recurring, consistent investment in education, which, in my opinion, that's all about build back better. Joe Biden's motto, which is about making sure that this country just doesn't revert back to pre-COVID. We're actually going to a higher and better place.
Right. So the infrastructure bill that's being debated now in the Senate will probably pass is what people are calling the hard infrastructure. And now what's going to be in that budget bill, the reconciliation bill, that will probably be passed just by Democrats alone. At least that's the anticipation. It would be nice if some Republicans voted for it. But that is being called human infrastructure, which will take care of things like daycare issues, talk about the child credits, tax credits, family leave issues, talk about the human infrastructure that will be part of that bill that, again, we've never really had before in this country to help families.
Yeah, I mean, I think the president in his State of the Union really laid out the case for why we need to expand the view of what are the real sort of underpinnings of a successful economy. And in the labor market, having consistent, affordable child daycare of high quality is really, probably one of the biggest drags in terms of people, being able to work, without worry about their kids, and knowing that their kids will succeed. Again, the wages in the, pre-K sector of this country are appalling. And, when you think about how important, and this, Sheila, that stage of life is in terms of the return on investment for success later in life. I mean, that is just a huge investment that, the president, I think, correctly identified as essential for a successful economy. It also includes a really eye-watering amount of money for home health care. Because as the population is aging, and that's just built in, to the, census and everything we know about where this country is headed, the demand for making sure that we have quality home health care is going to be even more acute than it is today. And it's hard for families to get, solid assistance to get help at home. For people who are, frail and elderly and disabled. And but again, we the sandwich generation, kind of problem of people who are just unable to juggle, the needs in the family. The president's budget and this budget resolution will address that in ways that we've never seen before. And again, we're talking about a sector where the average wage is about $15 to $16 an hour. We're talking about caring for, people and human beings and, Americans. And so, it's a very exciting budget. By the way, there's an investment also in the VA in terms of upgrading and modernizing our VA hospital system and clinics, which that kind of falls more into hard infrastructure because it's bricks and mortar, but that's never been included in the infrastructure bill. And there also is some more for school construction and some more funding for housing, which is, again, bricks and mortar in my book. And most people would say, well, yeah, that's infrastructure. So it's, I think it's a sound policy. I think it's what the country needs.
Okay. And what's your prediction? When do you think both of those bills will pass, both houses, Senate and House?
September.
Okay. Well, that's good. That's good. Yeah. We're on track.
Yeah, because again, budget resolution first, then you got to do the spending bills. That may leak a little bit into past October 1, but that frankly is kind of par for the course these days. And again, we that would be my prediction. Okay.
So the other big issue that encompasses the Voting Rights Bill, the John Lewis Bill, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and the gutting of it by the Supreme Court and legislation to try and bring it back to effectiveness. All of that is circulating around the whole issue of the threats to our democracy, which sadly, I don't know, you never talked about it in prior years running for Congress. We always assumed that our electoral system was safe, a model for the whole world, the greatest democracy ever on the planet Earth, like we like to think. What is going on? Talk about the January 6th insurrection, the big lie that Trump is continuing and his people are still under his thumb, it seems. What is your theory about what is going on and how are we going to fix our democracy?
So, yeah, I mean, just going back to the last election, I mean, because we were able to create a system where people could participate in the highest level of voting since the early 1900s. I mean, frankly, I think we did. That's one of the reasons why, power changed hands on January 20th. And also because we had elected and appointed officials, many of them Republicans in states that were contested, who did their job and followed the law and certified election results, and a Justice Department which refused to go along with the president's demands to call the election corrupt and fraudulent. And the acting Attorney General Rosen, who testified a couple days ago, confirmed about how even up till the bitter end, President Trump was trying to force the Justice Department to create a pretext for overturning the will of the people. And sadly, Sheila, as you know, despite the sickening events of January 6th, where you would have thought maybe the country would say, okay, enough is enough. It's time to really step back and remember, what makes this country so special, which is our democracy and the peaceful transfer of power. What we've seen instead is that, the Republican elected officials who had the courage to follow the law are being basically hounded out of office, and legislatures are stripping those offices of the power to certify results without political pressure from state legislatures. I mean, it's a very dangerous and shocking and disturbing trend that's happening in some of these states. Congress in Section 4 has the final say in terms of how elections are conducted. That's black letter law right in the Constitution. And in the House, we passed the We the People Act, which would be a course correction in terms of some of the Voting Rights Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which you mentioned, Sheila. It's pretty clear that the size of that package is not going to make it through the Senate. I mean, there are Democrats who have already balked at the full scope of that bill. However, as Manchin did agree to a voting reform bill that protected early voting, no excuse absentees, and a voter ID system that is actually workable. I mean, Connecticut has a voter ID system, but there's safety valves in terms of people being able to sign an affidavit, attesting to their identity, and on that basis go forward and vote. And so I actually think there are 50 votes to pass that package, but the question is really with the filibuster rule and the just absolute total opposition of Senator McConnell and his caucus, whether or not we're going to see some accommodation made in the Senate rules to allow a bill like this to go forward. And I don't know what I give up kind of trying to figure out what the tea leaves are there, but the stakes are so high, and this is not about the 2022 election. This is not about the 2024 election. This is about whether or not we protect a process that is the crown jewel of our democracy. And
right.
And I just
of
think,
course, Joe, yeah, because so many more states than a majority of states have Republican governors, and a majority of states have Republican legislatures, who you just said were passing some of these laws that are stripping some of the secretaries of state from their duties regarding the Electoral College, so that a legislature could just overturn it. And if Republicans take charge of the Congress. I know the 2022 election is important because
Right.
the Democrats need to keep control of the House and the Senate. It's very close and it's a very tough thing, but it will be an awful thing if the Republicans take control of the House of Representatives and leading up to the 2024. And the other thing I want you to comment on is, yes, we have Mark Elias and wonderful election attorneys who are working to appeal all of these laws that are undermining our democratic system of elections. But we also have a cadre of judges, many, some are great and some are holding the line, but we also have a lot of judges that were appointed during Trump's administration who are very right wing and who I think some of the Trump people are counting on. And will these decisions about these laws be even arrived at? You know, how long it takes to go through a court appeal process by the time we get to our voting. So talk about that. I mean, it is a terrible, terrible concern how we move forward when you do have people determined to undermine the system, go along with what Trump wanted.
I mean, look, I think you accurately described the fact that a strategy of litigation, you know, has got its, you know, questions about whether or not it can really succeed in terms of stopping some of these, you know, really, dangerous changes to electoral systems in some of these states. And, you know, the Texas Democrats, who I guess are condemned to, you know, basically being on the run to avoid a quorum in Texas, shows how dire, you know, this situation is. The bottom line is it still goes back to the 60 vote threshold in the Senate. You know, Manchin's modified voting rights bill, which Jim Clyburn in the House, who's about as staunch an advocate on these issues as anybody in the country, you know, has indicated he could definitely support, you know, Manchin's modifications to it. Then really the last remaining question is whether or not, you know, we're going to, you know, see an effort to change the Senate rules to allow a bill like that to go forward. And as you know, the filibuster is not in the Constitution. The Senate can modify its rules with a vote of 51, which obviously that opportunity is still there, and they can shape it to be limited to just certain circumstances. So as you know, cabinet positions, federal court decisions, and now the Supreme Court, because Mitch McConnell changed the filibuster rule to accommodate 51 votes to confirm a Supreme Court justice. I mean, they can do this. I mean, this is not mission impossible as a matter of law. It's really whether the will is going to be there to do it. And the president, you know, he's different. He's made some very, I think, powerful speeches where he's talked about the democracy, and I think he's sincere about it. But there's going to be sort of a fork in the road coming up here pretty soon in terms of just whether or not, you know, we're going to empower our legislative process to breathe and to move forward in a very dire situation. Right.
Even if those before the People Act, HR 1, and if the Senate passes something like that in the Senate, do you think even that could forestall some of the shenanigans that we know the Trump people will try again?
It's getting late. I mean, that's, you know, I mean, obviously just look at the calendar. And as I said, I think this thing is right now, I think the president and the White House, it's all hands on deck in terms of getting their legislative agenda through. And I think there's a logic to that. I think he knows that this country is still very divided, and it's really critically important for him to just deliver real results. And by the way, the rescue plan, you know, has 70% support in the country. And the same is true with infrastructure. And I think the jobs plan based, you know, budget that you talked about, you know, I think also is going to be up in those stratosphere. But, you know, the harm that's being done at the state level in terms of our voting rights, you know, has got to start moving up the food chain in terms of deliberation in the Senate. And we'll see. By the way, there's a very good book called Kill Switch on the history of the filibuster. It's been out for about within the last 6 months or so. It's not a long read. Highly recommend it. It
Kill
really
Switch?
makes Kill Switch. It's about a young
great.
guy who worked for Harry Reid and a really good history of Senate.
Okay, great.
It's not a long read. It's very well written.
It's important that people kind of understand that you need 60 votes, not to pass a bill, but to get a bill away from debate to get a vote on it. And that's what people need to understand. So I know you've got something that you need to do soon. So I have 2 more issues. I don't know if we'll have a chance to talk about them, but I'll just tell you what they are briefly, and then you can. One issue is, how important is it to hold President Trump accountable for his many crimes against democracy, forgetting about his many crimes privately or through his businesses? But will we see some kind of accountability for him? I want you to mention that. And the other issue I think is very important also, because the Republicans who use this against the Democrats improperly, the calls for defunding the police, I think it's something that's wrong. I don't think most Democrats believe in that. And I think the idea behind it is to transfer certain functions from funding police to community policing, to mental health issues, not to defund the police. And I hope you will make sure that your voice is heard amongst the Democrats to make sure the Republicans don't use that as a talking point, that you want better policing, more of community policing, which I know you've talked about in Connecticut. Okay. Take it for your last few minutes on those 2 topics.
Well, first of all, on the first question, I mean, I think, again, it's really tragic that we weren't able to do a 9/11 type commission for the events of January 6th. And, we had the votes in the House with 35 Republicans. And now we're at a place where there's the special committee, which, again, there's precedent in the House, Republican and Democrat, in terms of having a process like that. I think they mean business. They have staff and resources to dig deep in terms of what happened in terms of the lead up to January 6th. Again, I mentioned the acting Attorney General Rosen, who again met with folks on Capitol Hill to describe in pretty shocking detail about the pressure that was getting put on the Justice Department from Election Day all the way through Inauguration Day to try and, again, overturn the election results. And clearly, most of that just points directly at the Oval Office. And I think it is so important for our country that that get flushed out and as you say, get held accountable. The decision by the courts to basically allow Trump's tax returns to be turned over to the House Ways and Means Committee, which is established law that's been on the books for decades. That's now, as you know, coming to fruition. And I think there's a reason why he didn't want to disclose his tax returns, both political and policy and legally. And so, all this work is going forward with serious people who understand, that in a democracy, we're all accountable. And transparency is the name of the game. On the second point, thank you for asking that. If you look at the 2 workhorse programs of the federal government for local police departments, it's the COPS grants program and the Burn Justice grants. First is for boots on the ground. Second is for equipment. If you look at the Trump record for the 4 years that he was in office, he either cut or proposed eliminating those programs. It was Democrats who actually restored the funding. And in communities like Norwich and New London and Willimantic, they've used COP grants to bolster the ranks. So in terms of defunding the police in the most direct way possible, Democrats have a very strong record of supporting police departments. By the way, and it's in accordance with the community policing philosophy. I talked earlier about the rescue plan money, which is going to be used by many communities to pay police overtime costs that were incurred during COVID, or fill positions, or in fact, even make some capital improvements at police stations. There was not a single Republican who voted for the rescue plan, not one. And it was Democrats who delivered that. We have a very strong record and message to take to the voters about who supports public safety, and it's our party. And again, we want to do it in a way where people, will have confidence that they're getting treated fairly. And Connecticut obviously took big steps in terms of a bill that passed year before last. And there's still discussions going on in the George Floyd bill to this day. And Jim Clyburn reported that to the caucus the other day. Don't assume that a bill that puts in requirements for things like body cameras and no chokeholds is dead in the water. There's still life in that bill.
My point, Joe, and that of many other Democrats who want us to succeed, is that we don't allow these slogans to get in the way, and that the Democrats do better messaging of get what you're saying, getting that message out, and don't let the Republicans overwhelm the public with slogans that don't represent what the real positions are of the mainstream Democrats, of the president, of progressive congressmen like yourself. Okay, that's important. We worry about messaging. We know that one of the things Republicans do well is not telling the truth and making slogans and messaging that hurt or aim to hurt the Democrats and don't really tell the true story of what the positions are. Okay, this is coming from the grassroots and people who want the Democrats to have a better public messaging position on things.
Heard you loud and clear.
What? Yes.
I said
yes. Right. All right. So any final thoughts? I know you have to go, but we really appreciate your coming on and giving us the progress. We'll get back with you in a few months to see if all of the great legislation that's being worked on now is going to be passed and what the impact will be for the people, for our election system. So it's great to have you on. Some final thoughts, Joe?
Sure. I mean, one last point, which we didn't touch on, but, just a few weeks ago in July, the first enhanced child tax credit benefits started flowing to, and it's over 100,000 children in Eastern Connecticut. I've heard some complaints from people that, these are just for, families where people aren't working. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the enhanced benefit reaches up to about $150,000 per year in family income. The net effect of this bill is that it's going to cut child poverty in half in this country. Raising a kid is not for the faint of heart, and you know this from your work in family law, Sheila, and Rosa DeLauro, who has been working on this issue for a decade or more. It's a pro-life, pro-child program, and Democrats.
But it also has to be made permanent, right? In the rescue plan, it has a deadline. Is it going to be made permanent in the reconciliation bill?
Yeah, that one I will predict with 100% lead pipe cinch certainty, and because but again, it's something that faith-based groups, people who deal with children, they understand that this is, and we're not talking exorbitant, crazy amounts of money. It's $3,600 per year for a child of 0 to 6, but that can mean the difference between kids having diapers and good nutrition, and Rosa calls it Social Security for kids. And I think, again, it's a proud accomplishment that we were able to get into the rescue plan.
All right. That's a great note, something really positive, a great note to end on. So thank you. Good luck with your next appointment today and throughout your constituent work. And let's hope Nancy Pelosi calls you back to pass both the infrastructure bill and the reconciliation bill, and we can have a victory for not just for the Biden administration, but for all the people of your district and the country.
All right, Sheila.
Exactly.
Take care.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much, Joe. Take care. We'll see you soon, and we'll see everybody next time on Talk Back. Bye.
Bye-bye.